thank you guys for having me. I'm going to tell you a story of 2 riders, 2 warnings, 2 midnight runs, 1 goal in common, which was communication. 1 got caught, 1 did not. But before I tell you that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Sheriff Arkham from Pinal County, Arizona. If you don't know where that is, that's between Phoenix and Tucson. I was the sheriff there for 8 years. How many guys have I don't even know why I asked this because cops never raise their hands, but how many guys are cops in the room? See, there's probably double that, okay, just so you know. They don't like to raise their hand. I actually went to a training one time, and this guy gets up there, he said, rule number 1, never talk to the cops. And this is a room full of cops. So then the guy goes on and he's like, well, how many of you been in law enforcement for 5 years, 8 years, 15 years? And he asks probably 3-4 minutes of questions. Then he comes back and says, didn't I tell you not to talk to the cops? That's how good the cops are. So that's why you don't talk to the cops. How many you have a lot of firefighters in your EMS? All right. I know you guys aren't in your heads either. I didn't start out, how many of you knew you wanted to be a cop? Or a firefighter? I did not. I never grew up with that. I was born and raised in Hawaii, moved to the Philippines, then I moved to Arizona, then Panama, then Argentina. My dad was a businessman, and I never grew up thinking I wanted to be a cop. I wanted to be a businessman. And nobody in my family was a police officer. Nobody else was, in my wife's family was a police officer. I get people ask me all the time, too. I'll tell you this story before I get into more of my story. People ask me all the time in law enforcement, what's it like being in law enforcement? You firefighters don't understand this, because you guys, people cheer for you. Like at the end of the day, it's you guys get a big parade and a ceremony. We don't get that. But people will say, hey, Sheriff, what's it like being in law enforcement now with the way that the media treats you guys, with the way that politicians treat you, with the way the society treats you sometimes? And I said, look, 98% of the people we deal with are good people, decent people, normal people. Some of them make mistakes, we have to hold them accountable. 1% of those people deserve to be in jail. And the other percent deserve to never see the light of day again. And half of that percent need to get out of politics. I tell you that because I'm no politician. I am a patriot who loves God, family, freedom, and the Constitution, and that's why I do the things that I do. Which kind of led me into, I never thought about being a cop, but I was looking for something. I own my own business. My neighbor was a cop on an Indian reservation in Arizona, and I thought, I just need, something wasn't amiss, something was missing in my life. And one day he said, hey, you want to go on a rat hole? I'm like, sure, why not? You know, nothing else to do. So I go on a graveyard shift, and we get a call, and it was a call for a dad who had found a 20-year-old with a 14-year-old daughter. The dad gets into the scuffle with the guy writes out the guy. We show up, and if you ever been in these reservations, you'll have a house that behind it, I just do a bunch of desert or fields or whatever. That's how this was. So we show up, we go out there, we're looking at the back, we get in the desert. I'm riding home. And I'm out there, they let me out. I'm armed with a flashlight and courage, walking around in the desert. Didn't really know better. And I see this old abandoned travel trailer in the back, and I look through the window, and amongst all this trash and debris and clothes, I see what I think is a quarter size of skin. And so I'm like, hey, I think this guy's Indian. And they go in there, sure enough, they move the stuff, he's there, they grab him, they rough him up, chase him, put him in cuffs. I went home that morning, woke my wife up, and I said, honey, I'm going to be a cop. 6 months later, I was in the academy, and on my way to be a police officer. And ever since then, I never looked back. I found a profession that allowed me to protect the things that I love, to protect my family, to protect my freedom, to protect my country, to protect the Constitution, and to stand up for godly things. It was right in my wheelhouse. And so I dove right in. Now, when I first became a cop, communication was very different even, 20 plus years ago. When you first got out there, there was no computer in the car. We did have radios. That was good. They weren't P25, but we had radios, right? and the radios, you would get a call. We were on a reservation. So first thing they tell you is when you get out there, you got to buy the map book, right? You got to figure out where all the streets are. And then on the reservation, there are just some places that have no streets. So they'd be on the radio and go, hey, you got to go to the Loring House. And I'm like, where's the Loring House? Or the house past the big oak tree. You have to learn how to write it down, go, you're processing things in your mind, your FCOs took over here, watching what food you make. That's how communication was for me when I first started in careers. You know, then it progressed into, oh, we got computers in the cars now, and maps in the cars, and your call pops up on your computer now. The guys are getting into this profession, firefighters, law enforcement, communication has progressed tremendously. When we talk about communication in first responders, I told my wife, I said, hey, I have to talk about communication, what should I talk about? She immediately went to, well, you should tell them how you do all these videos, and if you don't know, we do this thing called Fridays with Frank at my ages. If you've been on YouTube or TikTok, you'll see Fridays with Frank pulling traffic stops. Long before that, we were doing don't camp in the left lane, drive through the left lane. It's a nuisance, and it's very, frankly, very inconsiderate. We would do those types of videos. We had put so much out that we quickly became, there was only two agencies ahead of us a few years ago and for Facebook followers, and it was the FBI and the NYPD. And I'm happy to say we passed up the NYPD like a year and a half, 2 years ago. We're number 2 in the country's Facebook followers. We probably have the most YouTube followers. We actually monetize our YouTube. So my wife immediately, when she thinks of communication, she went to that type of communication, setting the narrative at your agency, which I think is important too. I think it's equally important for us to be able to communicate with each other, to have that communication with the community on what they're doing as well. Oftentimes we partition those two pieces of communication out. But I thought it was interesting that my wife immediately, when I talked about communication, went to the thought of communicating with our community, communicating the work that we do, and how we do that work. But I said, no, I never talked about communication like radios, police radios, all that stuff. She's like, oh, I can't help you there. So I went all the way back. So I like to know, I love history. So I told you about these two writers. And we tell you about the first one. This was in April of 1775. And this is obviously just months after we had sent this letter off to England and said, hey, screw you guys, we want freedom, we're not going to do what you want to do anymore. And obviously England didn't take too kindly to that. And so they had set up a system of communication back in the days to notify each other when something wasn't right. They didn't have radios, didn't have all these things, and so their means of communication was to use an alarm system, and they would put lanterns in the towers, and what's the old saying, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea? That was the old saying. So come April, the English are coming, so they put the lanterns out, and Paul Revere sees one of the lanterns, he borrows a horse, and he rides all night, going from place to place, yelling at the British to come. This was the radio system back then. This was the communication system back then. Clunky at best. It was painstakingly slow, but it was the best that they had at that time. And it was the most effective thing. But it wasn't something, when we hear about Paul Revere, we hear like somebody just came and said, hey, the English are coming, you should go say something. No. They had prepared for this months and months and months in advance. They had established in a large system, a communication system, how we would communicate with each other. This gave us an advantage to be able to go across the countryside and notify the Americans that the English were coming. They were able to mobilize, but in truth, this communication didn't work so well for the English. This going to be, now we get to Bunker Hill. The Americans have settled in, they're going to now fight against the English, and the English show up to Bunker Hill. Because of the lack of communication, because how chunky that was for England, this is really the demise of England, is they had they were fighting across an ocean. Here's the headquarters over here, and they're fighting in a war over in America, and their communication system was such that at Bunker Hill, what gave the Americans success in that battle was the fact that the communication was poor enough to where the English sent the palm-sized cannonballs for the cannons they set up at Bunker Hill to fight against the Americans. That slight mistake allowed the Americans to have success. They were forced to march on the Americans. The Americans were prepared for it. They shot a bunch of the English to the point where they were climbing over each other's bodies to get them to retreat. They ended up killing 1,000 English that time. And because it was tactically, even though the Americans lost the battle at Bunker Hill, it gave them the energy to know that they could withstand England. That England wasn't able to just come in and decimate it with the Catholic hands. That was the lack of communication. Had England had a better communication system, they would have the right cannonballs, could have dispatched the American uprising much quicker and changed the course of it. But thankfully for us, their communication system didn't work either. You take it 2 years later. That's why we had 2 riders, 2 warnings. 2 years later, the English were marching on Danbury and Concord. And a rider rides into the house of Colonel Ludington. Colonel Ludington is sending his troops home to actually go out and deal with their farms and their families and do all that. So Colonel Ludington has this rider riding one night, late night, exhausted, and he says the English were marching on Danbury and Concord. And it collapses. So now the colonel's like, well, how do I get this message out to all my troops? I'll scattered across the countryside. His daughter, 16 years old, Sybil Ludington, she was there and said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll ride across the countryside and I'll alert everybody that the English are coming, that we need to regroup. Any father would say, no, you're not going. Not my 16-year-old daughter. He didn't have an option. The rider that brought the message was exhausted, actually exhaustion. There was a driving rainstorm that night, and Sybil Ludington got on her over 16 years old, and that night she rode 40 miles through the countryside, notifying the English, or notifying the Americans that they needed to regroup, that the English were marching on Danbury and Concord. Unlike Paul Revere, who was caught at the end of his run, Sybil Ludington did not get caught, and she actually did 40 miles that night, twice as far as Paul Revere rode. But you don't really ever hear about Sybil Ludington. But the crux of the story is, this was the communication system that they had to deal with. Just send a message, hey, we've got to rally the troops, we've got a problem, we've got an emergency. They couldn't stop what happened at Danbury, but they did stop what happened at Concord. I wanted to learn even more about communication, the progress of communication throughout history. So I pulled up, I did a little, thank goodness for AI, right? ChatGPT is becoming my best friend. I called a friend the other day from Tennessee, and I interrupted him. I go, what's up? What are you doing? He's like, I'm arguing with Brock. You can now sit there and argue back and forth with AI as if it's a real person, and they will push back against you. It's like him arguing with Brock. Tells me all about his argument. But I was getting on ChatGPT, and I said, tell me about the history of communication for first responders. And it starts really basically prior to the call boxes. It didn't really have any. You know, I told you about what Paul Revere and those guys were using as a communication system, but you get these call boxes where they would actually have to stop. You go even further back, you have the Puppy Express, right? Only express that ride across the country, deliver messages. Especially in the West, it is very, very expensive. It's very difficult to deliver messages. So then the first thing is the call boxes. Then, 1928, they developed, well, they have these telegrams, they started to retrieve that. 1928, you guys know what city came out with the radio system? Detroit. Somebody said it. Detroit. They came out, but you could only call the message to the deputy or the cop they could not actually respond. They still had to pull over, get out of the call box. And then it just slowly starts progressing, two-way radios, a little bit better each time. And it almost feels like what took 100 years now is taking 30 years, now is taking 10 years. But I find it interesting that when I got to modern day, it made a point to talk about 2001, 9/11 became the catalyst to one of the bigger changes. Not just with the P-25 radio systems, but it talks specifically about FirstNet and how FirstNet became that notification system. The need for something that reduced the chaos. 9/11, you had all these people responding with little to no ability to communicate with each other. I know Chuck will tell you all about it if you want to know the depth story, and many of you have already heard it. But the challenges that they faced at 9/11 was another one of those points in history of first responders where we now just realize we got to do that. The system has to be right. We have to get it right. Lives depend on it. You go back and you look at these things in history, our country, our freedom, those types of things, lives depended on it then. So different now. Lives depend on our ability to be able to communicate and be prepared for the worst type of things. I've always told my wife, you know why I buy life insurance? That way I know I won't die. Because the universe isn't kind enough to give all that money to you, They're like, if you didn't have insurance, you'll die. You get insurance, it's here. That's why you need insurance. Keeps you dying. There are things that are going to happen if we are outside of our control. But we have an ability to prepare for most things. When I talk about things, I'll tell you a personal story when I realized I would do things. I haven't been in law enforcement for a long time. I'd go around and speak to kids, and I'd give you 3 pieces of advice. And I won't really dive into the 3 pieces of advice I give to kids and cops and anybody. Number 1, be authentic. Be who you were meant to be. I tell kids, everybody has different fingerprints. We have different DNA. We have different irises. As a matter of fact, your irises are your most unique thing about you. There is not a single person in this world that is like you. If God doesn't tell you the godliness or the majesticness of who you are and what your purpose here is on this earth, I don't need to tell you. You are one of a kind. You are authentic. You are a gift from God to this planet. Most people forget that. We get up every morning, we look in the mirror, and we just start to nitpick ourselves for the flaws that we have, as opposed to seeing the beauty and the authenticity of who we are. So I tell the kids about that. Then I tell the kids, this is a tough one for them. Anybody who's been working with this new generation knows what I'm about to say is the truth. You cannot be afraid to do the uncomfortable work. Work is a problem for this generation. They're extremely intelligent, extremely talented. The work ethic is something they lack. They want to put their 40 in, go home, live in an apartment, very little responsibility. It has changed how things are. I tell them, if you want to excel in this world, you've never had a better time to stand out from the crowd. If you can learn to be the best worker of the breed, you have to be able to do the uncomfortable work. When we look at 9/11 and we look at all of the things that needed to be fixed, somebody had to get in and have the uncomfortable conversations and do the uncomfortable where they're saying, what went wrong, what could have gone better, and how do we make it better? That's being able to do the uncomfortable work. Any of you who have risen the ladder will tell, I can sit down with you and you can tell me all of the uncomfortable times. Any of you who own a company can tell me about all of the uncomfortable times that you had to work through to get to success. Life's no different. But the third thing is one of the most important things, and this is what I learned because Jim controlled everything, surrender the outcome. So I have 5 children. I have my middle son. He got off the beaten path. He got into drugs. He was in junior high. high school. It drove us crazy and fought with this. I mean, we just dealt with this as a family. You know, this is how I always say, like, politics, I can't even get 5 of my kids to be the same, let alone try to run, you know, millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people. But my middle son had a problem. He ends up getting into drugs. At one point, he's living with us, and we had an instance where he'd fallen asleep, not fallen asleep, passed out. And luckily, the cops didn't catch him. Unluckily, cops didn't catch him. We told him, you cannot drive red cars. Cannot drive red cars. And we went to a charity event one day. You know, no good deed goes unpunished, right? We're at this charity event, and my son calls me. He says, Dad, I just hit a guy on a bike. Oh, no, your world just moved. So we get out of there and drive over to his dad. It's close to our house. I pull up, I see my son standing at the back of the car. I check on him. I go over and I check on the guy laying on the ground. Paramedics are working him. And I say, I'm thinking to myself, please just do not let this guy die. It's a problem already, but it's a real problem if this guy dies. Yeah. Fortunately, he did not die, but he was not in good shape. I went back over to my son. One of the hardest things I've ever had to do is I stood in front of my son. I looked at my son and said, I have to leave you here. If I stay here, they're going to say that I am this case in some way. You're on your own. And we got in the car, and you drove off. I watched the airback take off, and I told my wife, I said, we'll pay for that bill. And we did. And my son ended up, that still wasn't the end for him. He still kept kind of going down that road. He did have an experience that actually stopped it and figured out. By the time he gets his life clean, he has a baby, he's got his wife, and now he has to go do 6 months in my jail. I said, you get out of jail, write a book called, I have a book called American Sheriff, Traditional Guys in the Modern World. My wife wrote a book called The Sheriff's Wife, Holding It All Together Behind the Scenes in Politics. We wrote those books so that we could pay for my son's legal expenses and paying the guy that we had to pay off. We sold books every weekend. While my son was still on the wrong path, we were hustling, trying to make sure that we could pay for those bills. My son eventually gets cleaned up. He's got his life turned around. He goes to spend 6 months in my jail. And I told him, you're going to write a book called The Sheriff's Son, Surviving Fentanyl in My Dad's Jail. Gets out of jail in October. The summer he's working, he's doing good. He's got his little 11-month-old baby. Goes to work. He doesn't come home. His wife and his girlfriend, or his wife and his daughter will pick him up. Fiance. They drive over. They don't show up. It wasn't uncommon. And I was out doing some stuff, getting ready for Christmas. It was December 16, 2022. And at 8:30 at night, we're sitting there, and we get a knock at the door. We open the door, and it's the sheriff from the neighboring alley, 2 white chiefs, and 2 chiefs from the local PD. And immediately, the air goes out the ring. And I said, you didn't send anything. My chief, who was know my kids, to stay with little kids, he looked at me and he just said, Cooper and the baby are dead. Like that, our lives changed. I lost my 22-year-old son, my 11-month-old granddaughter, and a week later, my daughter-in-law adopted. Yeah. We look at it, I say, be prepared for, I go to DUI investigations. They were hit and killed by somebody driving in the years on this alcohol and marijuana. Driving 75, I almost 80 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour zone. You look at it and you say, I should have been able to stop this. I should have been able to do something about this. Then I need to remember my advice. Got to sort of the out. You know, we can put the perfect communication system together. Is it going to stop bad things from happening? No. But is it an excuse to not continue to make it the best communication system possible? No, it's not an excuse. George Washington says, So the best way to preserve peace is, the most effective way to preserve peace is to prepare for the media. Really. And the most effective way to protect life is to prepare communications to systems appropriate, to give ourselves maximum advantage. If you guys watch the movie F1, F1 is a good movie. It's like branding, now they branding, expensive fly, all these other companies are genius, but really good movie. But in the movie, it's about F1 cars. And what you realize that in these F1 cars, everything they're doing is to shave off 0.1 seconds or 0.01 seconds off of every lap, so that by the end they can shave off 2 seconds. The tires they use, the drag on the car, all of these things, the angles they take, everything is designed to reduce it, which we would normally think in seconds or minutes. They are focused on reducing it down to tenths of a second, because they understand like even every tenth of a second you add up is the difference in whether you win or whether you lose. And as we develop these systems, we can't sit on the fact that we've got FirstNet, we're good. Now we're at that point. We've got to reauthorize it. We've got to build it up even more and increase the capabilities even more, so that we can shave off another tenth of a second and another tenth of a second. Because it is truly a matter of life and death in our professions. That little bit, whether it's a firefighter getting there or a paramedic getting there just a second earlier, or a police officer showing up a second earlier, it makes a difference. But it happens because we continually to progress through this communication process. And we're none of us, and we've got private sector vendors that are continuing to push the envelope and providing products that are shaving off a tenth of a second, at a tenth of a second here, at a tenth of a second here. You know, we had fortunately as a sheriff 8 years, the one thing you hope that never happens to you in law enforcement as a leader is that you lose a guy in a line of duty. I had one close call. We had an area, about the time we switched to FirstNet. We had switched over, and we now have this new radio P25 system. Part of the reason we did is because in this area, in my county, it's called the Copper Corridor, it's where all the copper mines are. But it's like separated from the rest of my county, and there's no good way to get there. The mountains are in between it, and they're isolated out there. And the radios used to not work. They still, they have their issues in a few spots. But we had a call, and usually it's one deputy out there, and the next deputy's probably a solid 15 to 20 minutes to it. So we get a call, and it's a call, the guy being disorderly, show up, it's in the middle of nowhere. Deputy gets out, he's a pretty calm, cool, collective deputy, and he's having an interaction with this guy, but this guy's standing there, and he's got his toolbox in front of him, he's got his tools he's holding on to. The deputy's like, hey, just put the regs down, it's all good. The guy is really agitated on edge, and he's kind of giving me some calm commands. And the guy finally kind of puts it down, and then just turns around and takes off. So the deputy starts chasing them, and now they're into the dark of night, and this guy takes his gun out of his belt and turns around, and these guys are always lucky as can be. He fires one shot and hits my deputy right here in the small artery. And my deputy pulls his gun, shoots that guy, hits him, he goes down. Of course, that guy survived. My deputy goes down. Luckily, my deputy is one of those calm guys, takes his own tourniquet, puts his own tourniquet on. But if we didn't have the radio system that we had, I might not even know this was going on. But because we had progressed, we had put better radio support, effective towers, we had FirstNet was giving us better service. We had ability for our guys to see on the map exactly where he was. This changed it. Seconds matter. He put his own tourniquet on. Luckily, the next guy came, and he put another tourniquet on tighter, we were able to air him out, and we were able to get him to Tucson, because that was supposed to hospital, and fortunately he saved his life, and I'm happy to report he's back on duty, full duty, but he could have easily died. You know, it's always it's the bleakouts that are always the ones that kill most people, and he had exactly one of those. But I attribute his life being saved to the fractions of a second that we shaved off by going from this radio system to this radio system, from this carrier to this carrier, for our ability to communicate with each other on a much more proficient way. We were able to save that life. We've been in this profession, anybody who's been in the profession knows you can't save them all. But if you save one of them, two of them, three of them, that's what we're here for. And the way we do that is through proper communication. I've been blessed to be in this profession, I think, when we have made the most advancements in these areas. And I anticipate where what used to take 100 years to change, I anticipate is changing monthly, at least on a 6-month, year basis. We continue to make these products better and better and better. And it's not just a matter of, just like Civil Ludington, Paul Revere, they were writing to preserve something. They were writing to preserve life. They were writing to preserve freedom. We write to preserve life, to preserve freedom. And the communication is really what makes that different. We don't often talk about it when we talk about the stories, and nobody ever sits and tells you, well, the reason why this worked out is because we have this radio system in place, and it's not what people tell you, but it's an integral part of every story. How that communication, what it was like to say it. I have been, the reason I'm here today is because I'm passionate about making this profession better on a daily basis. I'm passionate about shaving those seconds off. And if you don't think we can accomplish great things, I'm going to be saying anything, we need 14 Ps. 14 Ps. If you haven't watched it, you have a homework assignment this weekend. Go watch 14 Ps. It is a phenomenal movie. What it's about an English guy, and he's Nepalese, and he served in the English Army Special Forces, in Persia. And Gims wasn't even really a mountain climber, but he comes from good genetics, you know, that Nepal, those Kashupas that go up and hike these mountains. He all of a sudden decides, I'm going to climb 14, there's 14 peaks over what, 13,000? It's like a certain height, I think it's 13,000 or something. There's 14 peaks in the world. And climbers, I think the best somebody had found was there was a guy that had climbed these 14 peaks in 7 years. That's how long it took him, I think, to climb these 14 peaks. Well, Nimitz gets in there and he's like, I'm going to climb them in 6 months. Everybody is crazy. And so he starts training, doing all these things, and when he starts to go climbing, the first one he climbs, like he gets on the second one, he climbs it, and he gets all the way back down, and then they get a radio call that there's a group stuck halfway up. They climb back up, try to save these people at the end. I don't think they were able to save them, but they climb back up again, and then back down again. And then they kept going along every way. They ended up climbing, and what was one? I think it was the 11th one of his time, Mount Everest. And they get to Mount Everest, there are people that set a goal to climb one peak, Mount Everest. That's their goal in life. And they had been there for months trying to climb Mount Everest, but the ladder kept turning them, one thing after another, kept stopping from being able to get to the top. So Gibbs shows up, and he's on 11, he's got running out of time, he's got more beats to climb. He gets there, and the weather's not great, and he goes in this room, and he's telling them, hey, I'm climbing this tomorrow. And the pushbacks we got of them saying, oh, we've been trying to do this for 6 months, you can't do this, you're not going to be able to do this. But maybe it's set such a high goal at changing the way things were done that he wasn't going to let this in his way. And he wasn't going to let his short-sightedness of setting such a low goal, he could go Mount Everest, an amazing goal, it was only one. And these people were stuck because they had only set a goal of 1. He had set a goal of 14. He had to push through it. He ends up climbing after that stick, like he said, and a ton of people followed him. They made it up. People that hadn't been able to make it up for months, they finally made it up and accomplished their goal. And you on to the next one. He ends up climbing the 14 peaks in 6 months and 6 days, I think. That's what it was, 6 months, 6 days? There was a lady that recently did it in 180 days. Okay. So what took 7 years to climb, took 6 months to climb, 15 years, no, so many years later, and within a few years, now somebody did it in 180 days. That's the progression that humans can put into it when they set high goals and when they say, we're going to fix this problem. I don't know what the future holds to them, and I'm a tech guy. A lot of you guys in here probably have a much better idea of where the future of communications is going to go. But I have no doubt that you guys will figure out how to shave more tenths of a second off of what is very important life and death situations. I would say one more story, because I think it embodies what America is and nothing to do with communication really. But I love this story nonetheless. And it's the story of General Mad Anthony Williams that kind of shows the American spirit. And I think it just shows just how beautiful a country we live in and why it's so important to preserve that country. And General Mad Anthony Williams, one of General George Washington's favorite generals. The war had not been going good. They had lost this fort called Stony Point. And George Washington comes to General Mad Anthony Williams and he says, do you think you can take back Stony Point? And he says, sir, you issue the order, I'll storm the house. And he said, all right, we're going to come up with a plan. We're going to attack at night because we don't have the number advantage. They didn't have this to work. They were attacking the fort. And so he goes out and finds 1,200 of his best trees. And he brings them in. They don't have night vision. They don't have radios. They don't have all this communication. So the way they did is they put white balance bags around their hats and put white feathers in their hats. And one night, when the sun was down, they decided to start to stealthily attack. They didn't put balls in their guys either, because if somebody were to trip, they only put the bayonets on. Because if somebody were to trip, they'd set off their muskets and alert the English there would come. So they take the guns, no balls in it, just the bayonets. They start to attack. At some point, the English realized they were actually Haitian soldiers. They were, no, they were the English. They were English. So they start to attack. The balls do start to fly. General Mad Anthony Williams gets hit in the head and goes down. Tough old bastard he was, gets up, tells his men, you carry me into that fort. They end up taking that fort that night, and at 2 a.m. in the morning, General Mad Anthony Williams wrote a letter to General George Washington, and he only wrote 2 letters. And if you ever get a chance to go see Glenn Beck's personal collection, Glenn Beck actually has the letter that General Mad Anthony Williams wrote to General George Washington. And he only wrote 2 lines. He said, General Washington, the fort in garrison, Colonel Johnston, is ours. Our officers and our men behave like men who are determined to meet freedom. The question is, will we behave like men and women determined to meet freedom? So our freedom, our love of freedom, we stand to making our professions the best they can need to preserve life, liberty, and freedom for those people who we're called to serve. Every day I go out and fight because I love freedom. And I love the idea that I can help somebody preserve their life or preserve that freedom. And I'm blessed to be able to do it. I'm blessed to be able to work with folks like you in the industry, in the fire and best business about sitting and cooking in the fire place called on. You guys are all jacked, and we're all taps and eating donuts. That's what shift work does to you. But we live with it. Live with it. I'm blessed to be able to work with such fine professionals that could even you in the industry of emergency management, all the things that make this tick, and all the vendors that make our profession better and better every day, to where we increase not only our ability to save lives, but we increase our ability to save our own lives as we do in these jobs. So I thank you. God bless all of you. God bless our professions, and God bless America. Thank you so much for that meeting. You guys have any quick questions? I don't even know if we have time for it, but you have any quick questions? Yes, I'm James Biles. That's the first question I usually get. Somebody asked me if we jump out of a plane. We did a video for April Fool's Day where we did a video where we created like a fake airborne unit. And my son was home from the 82nd Airborne, and we had to fill the part where we were doing inmate transports. And we made it like we were jumping off of a plane with an inmate. And so I put my son in gel clothes, and we jumped out of the plane. And we had so many people, even my own employees, were like, "Sure, I want to be part of that airborne unit." I was like, "It's fake. It's fake. It's fake. It's the April Fool's Day show." But we did. If you ever want to watch it, it's an Alabama Sheriff's Airborne unit. You'll see. Any other questions? Yes.
You leverage. First off, sorry, thoughts later.
Thank you.
How did you leverage these and GPS related to your radio infrastructure 3 pause and area Palmer to West Grand County? How did you leverage that? What was structure? You guys put it on itself, came grand hunted, or how did you press?
So that's a great question. So we're still not working with, we don't have connection with AZDPS, our state group. As well as all the states where everybody's kind of got their own thing. What we did is we got a $17 million grant a few years ago to put in the P25 system. And so we were able to put in a bunch of towers. We were able to get a bunch of radios. So basically what we've done is put everybody within our county on our system. We still can't communicate with GPS usually. What we'll do is we usually have to radio and dispatch, they radio over to or else guys who work together like on the anti-smuggling along the I-10, we are dealing with a lot of human smuggling, drug smuggling. We'll share radios with each other so that at least we can hear each other's radios. But yeah, it's still a problem. You know, in Arizona, it's, you guys have a much greater need for GPS than, we don't work at the moment, so anyways.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? Yes.
You come on board when you broadcast do us back FirstNet class?
Oh yeah, look, I'm a huge supporter of FirstNet. We switched over. I was a FirstNet subscriber involved before on my personal level. We have these things called Country Thunder. And Country Thunder is a country concert, and we go from, it's a farm field, and then next thing you know, it's 30,000 people living there, and then the concert is about 60,000 people in this farm field. And so, as soon as everybody's in there, your cell phones don't work. But mine I was did because I had FirstNet. And then we switched over as an agency over FirstNet to where now, my guys were in the campsites dealing with, with calls for service, and we had no ability, or in the concert venue itself, we'd have a fight or something, or somebody have a medical issue, and we had a delay because we couldn't communicate. So being able to get that and push ourselves, ever since then, look, I've been a big FirstNet of what it does. I think that we've got to have somebody that has the ultimate say in what the communication is. We can't have 3, 4 different people, then nobody rises to the top. Nobody has the bandwidth at the top. We've got to maintain it where somebody has the bandwidth at the top. So I'm a big supporter of FirstNet, the authorization. So yeah, that's it. OBM. All right. Well, thank you guys again for having me.